Hey guys, what is going on? It's Jake here from Vantage Point Economics, and today we've got a exciting video for you. So this is my third video I'm putting out today, and we're going to take a look and explore a topic which is going to be the government deficit and how our government, the system that we as taxpayers pay money into, how that sort of handles our cash and what it does with it, and the problems, the serious problems that you will see. So without any further ado, let's dive into the slides. So let's take a look then at this first slide we've got then. So government spending, the deficit. Dun, dun, dun. So here we have a image of our friend Rishi Sunak, who many of you may know. This guy is the Chancellor. He's Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's essentially the treasurer of the government books, so it's his responsibility to be in charge of spending the tax money and essentially making sure the public sector runs. So I just thought I'd include that image there on the front. So let's dive into the first slide then. Let's take a look. So, okay guys, let's dive straight into this first slide then. So this first slide we have then the UK deficit. Now we've got this image here. What is it? Well, this is an extract from what is called the WGA, which stands for the Whole of Government Accounts. So once a year, the government basically essentially makes a report, an annual report of all of its income and all of its expenditure, and it puts it into this big report called the WGA, the Whole of Government Accounts. A bit like any normal company registered in the UK, whether that's a public company or a private company. All of them have to register annual accounts, and the government has to do the same thing in like manner. So this little extract I've got then, it says this is the statement of revenue and expenditure. Oh, okay. For the year ended 31st of March. So the fiscal year in the UK is always the 1st of April until the 31st of March, or the 6th of April to the 5th of April, depending on how you want to look at it. In substance, it's the year ended 31st of March. And so, yeah, if you think about it, that makes total sense that they would do their reporting in line with those dates, because when do we have to file our taxes in the UK? It's in the tax year, which is April to March. So how does this look then? How is this revenue and expenditure reports, this statement, if you like, how do we read this then? So we've got, at the top we've got tax revenue. So that is income. That is income that the government's getting from taxing people, businesses, companies. When you die, inheritance tax. When you sell your second home or you sell an asset, you pay capital gains tax. Businesses pay VAT on their sales to consumers and other businesses, and just all shapes, shades and sizes of taxation that the UK government, HMRC, impose on people and businesses. So we can see, look, for the year ended 31st of March 19, £686 billion. So that's quite a lot of money. So the question becomes, how do they spend this money? This let's call it 700 billion, or in fact, total public services revenue 800 billion. There's 100 billion of other revenue. I'm not sure what that is, but we can explore that in more detail another time. So they've got 800 billion of tax revenue. Now, what do they do with it? We've paid all this tax. What happens to it? Where does it get spent? So let's take a look. So we've got social security benefits. So this would be okay, I'm not quite sure exactly what that'll be. So I'll have to look into that a bit more. But we've got staff costs here. So we know that that's going to be essentially the cost of the salaries of people that work for the government. So whether they're teachers or nurses or doctors, council workers, all these sorts of people who are on the government books, police, firemen, many other things, many other public services. So we've got purchase of goods, services and other expenditure, okay, grants that are issued. So essentially this is a really good summary of all the government spending. And we can see, well, oh my goodness, look, total expenditure on public services, so, providing schools, providing the NHS, providing, roads, keeping our roads in shape, all these sorts of things. Total expenditure, 851 billion. You think, hang on a minute, the income's only 800. So we've actually got a net deficit or net expenditure on public services of 56 billion this year. So we're overspending. So the government collects money in tax receipts and then it spends more than it generates in revenue. The operating deficit is roughly 50 billion per year. Now that's, if you think about that, what would happen to a household or to you or I if we spent more than we earned, every year? Well, we would eventually have to get into debt in order to do that. And that's no different for the government. The UK government is getting into debt in order to live beyond its means, in order to spend more than it earns. Short term, it might be a good thing or a necessary thing to get into debt. Something very urgent comes up that you need to pay for. But it's not a long-term sustainable solution if you want to have healthy finances anyway. So we read the net deficit's roughly 100 billion per year. So that point really, if we look down here after the operating deficit on this row here, there's sort of some other funny movements that get us down to the net. So they're saying they had net expenditure of 200 billion last year, but 1.5 billion this year. Well, I think on average that's about 100 billion. So it's still a big negative figure, basically. So the operating deficit is most relevant as it reflects spending in the real economy, yeah. So the point is that here's the tax revenue we get from paying taxes, and then here is the cost of running all the government business, and it's more. And it's not sustainable. That's the point I want to make. It's not a sustainable thing. And it's been like this for years and years and years. So let's go ahead and take a look at the second slide then. Okay, UK indebtedness. Do you remember that I mentioned, you can't just simply spend more than you earn indefinitely. You have to fund this somehow, and it gets funded by debt. So let's take a look then. So total government borrowing as at 31st of March 2020 is £1.4 trillion, equal roughly to double taxation revenue. So friends, remember back on this first slide here, we had taxation revenue of about 700 billion. Well, the debt is 1.4 trillion, which is two lots of 700 billion. So to give you some perspective as to what that means, in order to repay that debt that the government owes, we could pay all the taxes exactly as we do right now, and the government could spend not a penny for 2 years. We could have 2 years where there's no firemen, no police, no teachers, no NHS, and they spend nothing. No ministers, no MPs, no, none of that stuff you see on the news, right? We could get rid of that completely for 2 years and just pay tax. Then we could afford to pay off the debt that we owe. So this is a huge debt that we owe. Makes you think, is it ever going to get paid back? Probably not. So total government borrowing is 1.4 trillion. So here we look, interest cost is roughly 32 billion. So let's go back to that income and expenditure statement again. Look down here, this row here, interest costs on government borrowing, 31.6 or 32 billion. Interest cost is roughly 5% of tax revenues. So this is really sad because we work hard in our jobs, and you pay lots of tax, and to know that for every £1 of tax you pay, 5% of it will be spent on interest. Here, only 95% of it can go towards funding the NHS and police and public services, etc. Because 5% of it's got to go straight on interest. So the more we borrow, the more this interest portion will grow, and the more that will cause issues in terms of the government wanting to fund the public services that we so greatly need in the country. So this is an issue. Now let's go to the next slide then, and what can we learn? So here we go, the 2020 deficit. So, friends, the numbers I just showed you were until 31st of March 2019. Now, what happened in March 2020? Well, we had the COVID crisis, so we know that the indebtedness is going to be much higher now, and the borrowing would have been much greater. But let's just get a sense of perspective about how the COVID situation has impacted the government books. So, public sector finances, this is a document from the Office for Budget Responsibility. The Office for Budget Irresponsibility, maybe, but right, so this came out on the 21st of July. Budget deficit reaches 128 billion in just 3 months. So, guys, let's go back to our first sheet and look. Our operating deficit is normally sitting at about 50 billion. Yet, if we go back over here, look, in 3 months, we've got to 128 billion. So we're over double in only 3 months. This is crazy. And of course, this is because the government has put together all this fiscal stimulus, all of these paychecks and loans and furlough schemes for the businesses to help us get through the COVID transition. And so it's very interesting because on the face of it, these schemes, the furlough scheme, the loan schemes, government paying people's wages, on the face of it, we think, yeah, that's great. You know, this is great. The government's going to pay my wages. Fantastic. But what will that mean for the country moving forwards? And actually, is the short-term healing to our pockets, is this going to create, long-term problems down the road? Are we just kicking the can down the road? So let's have a look then. So 3 months into fiscal year 2021, we're already at a total deficit of 128 billion, so much bigger than in prior periods. The forecast total deficit for 2021 is 300 billion. So if they did 128 in the first 3 months, in the last 9, they're going to top it up to 300 billion. That'd be 6 times bigger than it was in 1819, which is just remarkable. And so we have to ask ourselves, what's the consequence of this? Well, we know that the borrowing is already at 1.4 trillion, which is twice tax revenues. It must shoot up several hundred billion as a result of the COVID measures. And therefore we can expect as taxpayers that our taxes will go less far. They'll go shorter in terms of paying for our public services because we need to service all this new debt that we're getting. The amount of debt interest costs we're going to have to pay is just going to go up and up and up. And friends, you've got to think about this from a very simple point of view. Just imagine, running your family home. If you just keep going into more and more debt, eventually it becomes unmanageable. And the ultimate consequence is bankruptcy. If you can't pay your bills, you become bankrupt. And friends, if the country went bankrupt, we would be in a major crisis. It would cause so much hardship and pain. So it's really worth thinking about, when we think about our views on all this fiscal stimulus that's going on, all this reckless spending, overspending. We're living beyond our means, and it's the future generations, it's the future who will have to pay for it. So there we go. That's just some thoughts I thought I'd share with you that I'll probably do for this video. And I plan to make some more videos in the future where I will talk about the impact on the future generations, and we'll look at other things like pension schemes and things like this and see how they're shaping up for a possible disaster as well. So I hope you enjoyed this, and do stay tuned to the channel for more content, and have a great weekend. Take care.